we want to introduce some general sensory strategies that you can use in your day-to-day life, and then just share resources that we know of and things that are helpful for us and parents that we've worked with. So just to start out with what is OT, so occupational therapy. So we use engagement and meaningful activities, which is a big part of our approach. So wanting the activities that we do with children to be meaningful for them, which usually involves play, because that's how children learn. So this helps them participate in their daily routines, just all those things that they have to do, that they even want to do. Oh, sorry. So I'll try to come a little closer maybe. Okay. There you go. Is that better? Okay, awesome. So I'm helping children just engage in all those activities, those things they have to do each day, to get ready to get out of the house, to go to school, to learn, and to do those things they want to do, right? Things they enjoy as well. As part of what we want to help them engage in. So the work of childhood is to play, to learn, to move and grow and interact with the world and with the people around them. So being able to do that in their environment and with the people that they're going to meet in that environment. So it can look in a lot of different ways. So our role specifically in sensory processing. So we're going to assess, we're going to look at what are some of these areas in sensory processing that are difficult for them? Maybe what are some strengths that they have for sure? And find out where those needs are and where we can really get in and help them. What are parent priorities as well? What are some of these things that are happening all the time that we really need to focus on and prioritize? And then intervention, so that therapy after that ongoing therapy. We want to help them to be able to better make sense of the information in their environment, the information from their body that's coming in all of the time, and be able to react to that in more appropriate ways so that they can, again, do those things they need to do. We also, alongside of sensory processing, right, we're going to work with some of their fine motor skills, coordination skills, all these other skills too that are underlying to help them do all those activities that we expect them to do on a daily basis. And so then looking at autism and sensory processing. So a lot of times people will ask, do all people with autism have a sensory processing difficulty? Or and the answer is most do. It's part of the criteria that someone like Dr. Okamoto is going to look at as he's deciding, what's the proper diagnosis. He has these criteria, and you have to meet, a certain number of those, and difficulty with sensory processing is one of those. So it is definitely very common in autism, but it doesn't have to be. And then does having a sensory processing disorder mean someone has autism? No, it does not. Lots of children will have a hard time with sensory processing. They may have another diagnosis like a learning disability or an attention difficulty, or they may have no other associated diagnoses, but they have a really hard time processing all of this information coming in and being able to respond appropriately. And we'll talk more about how that can affect their daily life. So really, when we're talking about sensory processing, the way we talk about it isn't going to be unique to just children with autism. It's something we're going to work on with whatever child has that issue, no matter what their diagnosis is. And then what is the difference between sensory preferences and a sensory disorder? So all of us have preferences, and we go ahead and have you look at the handout that you have. So it has kind of a little checklist on it. And this one is meant for adults. So you'll look at some of the items on there. This one's not a checklist meant for children. But for you to have a better understanding what your sensory preferences are. And sometimes we want to look at that in comparison to our children. But it's more of a preference, right? Maybe we don't prefer going to the amusement park. Maybe when we're studying, we prefer to have it quiet, or we prefer to have the TV and other things going on. You know, we have our own preferences, but it doesn't keep us from doing the things we need to do on a daily basis. For children that are really struggling with sensory processing, it's really keeping them from going and doing really simple everyday kinds of activities. Maybe leaving the house or transitions are really difficult, or even just getting dressed in the morning is really difficult. So that's the biggest difference, as you know, is it really keeping us from doing those things that we need to do, or even things they really want to do. You might even notice your child wants to do something and then you get there and they just can't. So we want to be able to help them. I'm going to actually go a little bit out of order. Okay. So what is sensory processing? What are we talking about? So it really is, in simplest terms, the way our brain is receiving this information, it's organizing it, it's responding to it in order so that we know how to behave in a meaningful and consistent way. So from our environment, even just here sitting in this room, you've got your lights, you've got, you know, sitting in your chair, you feel your clothing on your skin. You can hear me, but you can also hear people moving around, maybe flipping their papers, maybe somebody out in the hallway. And so our brain's deciding, what am I gonna pay attention to? What do I not need to worry about? I don't even notice it. What's relevant and how do I respond to that? Is this just a normal, everyday okay thing? Is this a threat? Is this something I need to respond to in a way to protect myself? So it gives us that idea of how do we respond socially? How do we behave in this environment? We get all those cues for what's going on around us and how to respond to that as well. And we also have information coming from within inside our body. Am I hungry? Am I cold? Do I need to go to the bathroom? Do all of those kinds of things. Am I tired? Am I excited? All of this is information, right, coming in from our bodies to our brains to figure out, what do I do with this information and how do I respond in a way that works in this environment, right? Screen changed on us. What happened? I think so. We had it up with what's here, and then it changed.
Okay, I can get them for you, the presentation view. So I'm sharing it.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So she's gonna, they can't change her, so.
I can't do mine. Yeah. I don't know. What do I know?
This is a good break for me to actually do the beginning of this, which is to give them their medals for being speakers while they're working on the technical difficulties.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, maybe just minimize it. Oh no.
Yeah, so that's the screen.
That's the,
You need
that one. I think that's the right one. Okay. This one maybe did not hear this.
Are you good?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Okay.
We have a soap from Susan Rocco's son too. Wow. Good stuff.
Your mic back.
Oh, thanks. Okay. All right. I think now we are back where we can change. Yes. Okay. Perfect. So there's a lot of terms, maybe if you've sought out some information about sensory processing before, or even gone to an OT before, there's a lot of words that are used that we don't use in our everyday kind of world and language. So we just talked about just what is that sensory integration, what is sensory processing, but then you hear like regulation, what is that? So it's just how we're gonna maintain and shift different states. So how awake am I? How on guard am I? What kind of part of my brain am I using? Like, am I really thinking part of my brain, or am I using really automatic responses from my brain? And so that's going to change, right? Depending on the demands of the environment. And can I match my state to the demands of the environment and keep a nice, pretty even, you might hear like an even keel kind of a response. So that's when we are regulated. We learn best in that way. We respond best in that way. We engage in activities and social events, and that's kind of our mode. So then you hear, oh, dysregulation, this child's so dysregulated, right? We've heard that. So that's when it's not balanced. We're not really using kind of that right part of our brain. We're not in our thinking part. We're in that just reaction part, some of those lower parts of our brain. And so it's very difficult to think, right? We've seen our kiddos have those almost like that meltdown. There's no rationalizing when we're in that mode because we're not using that part of our brain in that moment. And it's not balanced, right, in our nervous system. And so it could be due to an event, too much sensory input, not enough sensory input, or a certain kind. We definitely attach emotional value to our sensory experiences. And so that can influence that as well. And then we'll go even more detail in some of the under-responsive, but essentially it can take a higher level of stimulation to really get a response, or we just don't quite kind of stay in this kind of low energy mode, it kind of looks like, and it takes a little more to get going, or don't tend to notice things as much. Really sensitive. So I feel like this is one of the ones we get probably referrals for a lot, because these are the kids that are not flying under the radar, kind of like the under-responsive. These are our kids that notice everything, right? So they may or may not be the ones that are having a big reaction to everything, but they definitely notice it. It definitely affects their attention and how they're responding. And they may be very reactive to it as well. It may be very stressful for them. And then the sensory seeker. So that's just a lot of times our F1 kiddos that are more under responsive. It takes that higher level of stimulation to get them to kind of figure out, oh, I can pay attention to this, right? We talked about that filter. What are we going to pay attention to? What are we not? And so maybe their filter, not as much as getting through, right? So they need a stronger sensation, and a lot of times they'll seek it out. Oh, I need a bigger kind of movement. I need more movement, or I need brighter colors and brighter lights, or more sounds to feel like I'm in that kind of mode of being awake and being alert and doing what I want to do. Can also easily get overstimulated as they move and seek that kind of stimulation. And then some of these other ones, terms are things that will go along with elements of the treatment after our intervention. So like deep pressure is really just that firm tactile sensory stimulation that can be very calming in general. Stemming is another word I feel like you hear a lot, especially with autism. And it can be providing some stimulation to themselves. It can be through any of our senses. And it can, other words for it, you might hear stereotypy, or just repetitive body movements, repetitive movements with objects. All of these things are a way that they're getting some of that stimulation. And for many kids, they can find it calming or comforting. It's something they can control, something that they can predict, and something that's familiar for them. And then a sensory diet. So it's not food, right? This is what we need to get through the day. So it's like when we work with an occupational therapist, we'll try to work on strategies and activities for that child to do throughout the day. So it's kind of a prescribed list of multisensory experiences, and it's designed to support their function so that they can do what they need to do during the day and stay regulated. So now that we have our terms more defined to help them with that regulation.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about sensory processing. So we talked a lot about how sensory processing, all of this happens in our brain. And so we're all sensory beings and all of us have sensory processing. And when we are in an environment, all the sensory information is coming through us through our 8 different sensory systems. So let's think of the environment like at the beach. So imagine yourself on a beach here, maybe your favorite beach. Visually, you have a lot to see. Maybe the sun is really bright, you're watching the waves, you're watching other people. That's our visual system. Auditory is hearing. So maybe you're hearing birds, you're hearing the waves crash, you're hearing kids laughing. Gustatory is taste. So maybe you're tasting a sour popsicle that you brought, or crunchy snack, or tasting the sand even. Olfactory is smell. So smells at the beach, maybe seaweed, maybe someone's grilling something on the barbecue. And then tactile is touch. So the feeling of the sand on your toes, the feeling of the towel on your legs, and the cold temperature of the water. So I feel like those are like the main sensory systems that a lot of people think of and are a little bit more intuitive. And then there's 3 others that are a little bit less known. So one of them is proprioception. So that's the force to your muscles and your joints. So when you're at the beach, walking through the sand, you're having to work a lot harder than walking on the pavement. So that's a lot of proprioceptive input. So anything where you're pushing, pulling, using your muscles and joints in your body, that is sensory information to your proprioceptive system. The next one that's a little bit less known is the vestibular system. So this is everything related to balance and movement, changes of position of your head in space. So things like spinning at the beach, think maybe if a kid is tumbling or going upside down, even the feeling of being in the water, that gives you a lot of vestibular input. And then the 8th one is interoception. So that's monitoring your internal state. So am I feeling hungry? Do I need to use the bathroom? And how am I feeling right now? Am I happy? Am I sad? All of those things that could be going on internally. So sensory processing disorder, this is a way that occupational therapists have categorized the differences in these patterns of sensory processing that we see. So sensory processing disorder is not yet a recognized diagnosis in the DSM, but this is kind of ways that we can describe the patterns that we're seeing. So sensory modulation disorder is one of the most, I think, common and the ones that we kind of understand the most. So we were talking about that sensory over responsivity. So that's your sensory sensitivity or hypersensitivity. So those are the kids that are really sensitive to loud noises, sensitive to touch, sensitive to taste, and reactive to those. There's sensory under responsivity. So that's hyposensitive or undersensitive. So maybe they're not registering this sensory information and they might not be interacting with their environment as much or not really notice when they get hurt or injured. These kids aren't registering that sensory information as much. The 3rd one is sensory craving. So sensory craving is our sensory seekers. These kids have a really high threshold for sensory input, so they need a lot of sensory input to feel regulated and calm and register what's going on. So they need, a lot of them need more. These might be the kids that you see are kind of running all over the place, crashing into things, bouncing off the walls, kids who are putting lots of things in their mouth. These are our sensory cravers. So our 2nd category is the sensory-based motor disorder. So this is dyspraxia. So that we see this with kids with challenges with motor planning. So that's their motor skills. These kids might be clumsy and have a hard time like doing things like sports and physical activities. We have postural disorder, which is everything related to balance and core strength. So a lot of these kids we see leaning over on things, have a lower threshold for endurance and just activity. And then the third classification is sensory discrimination disorder. So this is discriminating and interpreting sensory information, and you can have it in any of the sensory systems. And in these three classifications, kids might be, they can have multiple areas, and yeah, they can have discrimination disorder and modulation disorder and motor disorder. So we see kids with a variety of mixture of all three of these areas.
Yeah.
I'll just say what I know about my own son real quick, and then she can go on. I just wanted to make a note to whenever they were talking about sensory diet, some of you guys may have gone into IEP sessions. So you can have sensory diets placed in your IEPs for kids that have certain sensory needs. So that's just something to take note of. My son personally had a G2 for 8 years, so he has a lot of aversions to foods that he eats, certain textures and stuff like that. He also has to have something in his hands. So he's always holding like a spatula or a spoon, or if he finds tissues, it has to be tissue, it can't be toilet paper. And he just rolls it until it becomes shredded like dust. So I try to find different things that he can have in his hands just to keep him calm, and and then otherwise he will rub his fingers together and he'll get calluses there. So I try to make sure he's got something that he has in his hands at all times.
So Gabrielle went through kind of those different types, and this is just expanding a little bit on those different types of the modulation. Has a lot to do with that sensitivity and our responsiveness to it. So are we over responsive or under responsive to all that information coming in, and a graphic that I'm not sure I came from originally. I've seen many different places, and it's a really neat graphic to kind of take a second and look at. Do you know me? And as you look through some of these little descriptions, you're like, oh yes, I do. These are some of the different signs that they may have modulation. And then the motor disorders. So we just talked about the postural is balance, core stability. So sometimes it's literally that core strength. Some of it's just being able to coordinate and keep those muscles turned on to keep ourselves upright and keep ourselves, in the posture we need to be to do what we're doing, and staying engaged. And we talked about that motor planning. How do I sequence all these little movements? Even just think about putting your shirt on. How many different movements you have to do with each of your arms, with maybe getting your head through to get that shirt on your body. Your brain is already processing all of that and coming up with a sequence of every little movement to do that. And so for some of our kiddos, they're thinking through all those movements. It takes them a little more effort to think through something like that, or to learn a new movement pattern. Maybe after they practiced it, it takes them a little more practice to get to where they can put their shirt on. But once they have it, okay, we've got that pattern. And then you have a shirt that fits differently. It's tighter, it's looser, and it feels like we're starting all over again, right? Because we're having to change that pattern a little bit. We're going to a different playground. But they did okay on the play structure where we go all the time, and then we went somewhere new and they maybe just sat and watched everybody else play for quite a while before they tried to engage. As they're kind of watching, trying to figure out, how do I move my body in order to get onto this play structure, to do what I want to do. They may feel a little bit insecure about doing new things as well, because it does take a lot more effort. Plays a big role in handwriting, OTs. That's probably what a lot of you are familiar with. For us, is handwriting, and we definitely work on that. But that motor planning, knowing how to sequence the movements of making each letter. And I think the discrimination is definitely a little bit more of the technical side of it. Am I able to, if I were to draw a letter on the back of your hand, could you tell me what that letter was, right? Can we feel where that movement is and how it's going, and turn that into kind of spatially in our mind what that would look like, and interpret that information on a little bit more complex level. And so that would be an issue with kind of tactile discrimination, which so it's a little different than that registration, right? We felt it, we didn't overreact to it. It wasn't like, oh, you touched my hand, I'm gonna pull away because that was too tickly. And it's not, I didn't notice that you touched my hand, I noticed that you touched it, but I can't figure out what it is. I can't make sense of this information that you're giving me. And you can see that with visual. Maybe we have a really hard time with figure ground, finding an object in a kind of crowded drawer is very difficult. Or if I'm looking for something in the refrigerator, a little bit of it's covered up, and now I can't quite figure out that that's the thing I'm looking for, would be an example for visual. So that's what more of the discrimination disorder might look like. And it can be for any of the systems as well.
So how does sensory processing impact a child? So sensory processing is one of those foundational skills, and it kind of impacts our participation in all of these different areas. So attention, so a child's ability to like sit at a desk and participate during school. Motor skills, so things like writing, cutting, kicking a soccer ball. Emotional regulation, being able to stay calm and not overreact when something doesn't go our way, or when there's a challenging sensory experience. Behavior, sensory is behavior too, like all behavior, sensory processing impacts our behavior and our reactions. It can impact children's self-esteem, so their kind of confidence in their ability to do things and the way they feel and look. And then self-care, so those things that can be challenging, like brushing teeth, getting your child to eat vegetables, getting your child to wear different kinds of clothing, all those things. Melissa, do you have any thing you want to add about how it's impacted you?
She was just, whenever it's almost like when we're parents, we forget they have all these things, and then when we're watching these sessions, like all these light bulbs keep going off in my head. And exactly what they're talking about, particularly with my son, the tags on the back of the shirts, he hates that. And good thing we live in Hawaii, because he cannot stand long sleeves or long pants, right? And if you put long pants on him, he's got them up above his knees. So good thing he wears shorts every day, right? I mean, I'm sure that a lot of your kids too have those sensory issues with the clothes and stuff, and how it is in school. And even in with putting on socks and stuff, it took him a long time, just because he didn't have the fine motor to put the strength that took in his hands that you can put on his socks. And Robin has worked with my son before, so she knows exactly what I'm talking about with that. Even writing, you can use like weighted pencils or these tools, which she showed me about. So my son has these, and he does use them at school, because sometimes the pencils are a little bit difficult for them to maneuver, you know, so just some tips.
Yeah, thanks for adding that in. So this is just a really busy graphic about kind of what we are thinking of when we're talking about sensory processing. So at the bottom, we keep using these words, arousal and regulation. So that's maintaining that calm state to participate like maximally in your function. So for me, think about in the morning, maybe you might need a little bit of caffeine to get going. And then after lunch, if you're feeling kind of slower and drowsy, maybe you need to move your body or stretch, something to keep you in that optimal state so you can get through your day. The other important piece is just relationships and engagement. So that's your child's relationship with you, with the people that they work with, and their engagement in meaningful activities and things that are important to them. So we always try to incorporate children's interests, because that's how we're going to get them to best actively participate in the things that we want and need them to do. And then from there, we have all the sensory processing at the bottom, and it's kind of our foundation for building all the skills. And at the top is our optimum goal with this is just the joy of life and participating in everyday activities. That's kind of what we want our kids and everyone to be able to do. Okay, so now there's a little participation part. We handed out a handout. We want you guys to learn a little bit more about your sensory preferences, and maybe we can compare to your child's sensory preferences. So go ahead and pull out that checklist, parent checklist. You can start filling it out. You have a minute. We'll take a couple minutes to do that. So it lists a bunch of different sensory inputs, and you can mark on it if you've tried that sensory strategy, if it has increased your state of arousal or decreased. So like we were talking about earlier, everyone has sensory preferences. So this is going to help us learn a little bit more about our individual preferences. For example, for me, I really like dim and natural lighting. I like lavender essential oils. I feel the best when I'm moving my body, doing yoga or surfing. I really like crunchy and spicy foods, and I'm really sensitive to vestibular input. So I avoid like the teacup ride at Disneyland.
And so, yeah, we all have those different preferences. You probably maybe remember from in school, you had that roommate that would study in the living room with the TV on and everything happening around them, and that was perfect for them. That's what they wanted. And then the roommate that's in their own room, close the door, turn everything out, don't bother me, or I can't focus and do what I need to do. So we kind of have those different preferences, right, for our environment, and they different ways that help us maybe when we're in a mode that we're nervous about something or anxious about something, or just trying to get to that like more calm state where you can really think well. So I'll tell a lot of times people they're like, oh, my child chews on things, right? They're putting things in their mouth. So, well, look at the sidelines of almost any sporting event. How many of the coaches or sometimes the players have gum in their mouth, or they're chewing on their mouth guard, right? They've got something in their mouth, and that's helping them regulate. And a while back, one of the golfers started chewing gum while he practiced. And it's a revolutionary thing. And OTs were like, well, yeah, fine. we know about this. So having that thing in the mouth can help sometimes organize, but we do it in different ways. And sometimes being able to have that perspective of maybe why my child is wanting, something in their mouth, or wanting the lights on or the lights off, or certain sounds on or sounds off, can help us look at that from a different perspective. So this is a way, and sometimes you have kind of very similar, so you might be a little bit similar to your child, or you might be very opposite. It's also kind of interesting to think about it just with other family members or friends too. Oh, I like things this way, and this family member likes it that way, or notices this and I don't. And why can't we, we're just not on the same page. It's not like either person may have a disorder, but they just have different preferences, right? Different ways that they operate within their environment. So gives you a little more awareness to that as you think about yourself and about the people around you. And there's some questions on this as well to think about as you go through that checklist, and then look through those questions to kind of think through how you respond to your environment. Okay, so now we're going to talk about just some of these tools. So we've focused a lot on that regulation, right? So these are tools that are sensory tools, and we're thinking kind of from that regulation perspective, staying in that kind of just right. So we're not way up here super excited, but there's times that's okay, right? You're cheering for something, or you're excited because you're about to go to Disney World. You would be jumping around and really excited, but we're not going to be in that state all the time. Or end of the day, I'm tired, I'm sitting on the couch, kind of couch potato. We can't stay in that state all day either. We've got to find that middle to operate effectively most of the time. And so these strategies and tools, we have them broken down into those different areas, or different sensory areas. And we might use a child's preferences to help decide what kinds of tools would be the best for them. These are kind of general lists. Always have to preference with, we can't make those specific recommendations for a child that we haven't worked with, right? We wanna just let you know, these are ideas that are out there that are kind of general recommendations. And your child may or may not be really sensitive or really craving sound, but we can still use that to create an environment that works well for them. So there's different, the soft music, simple melodies in the music, are more calming, rhythmic music that has that really predictable rhythm or beat to it. Familiar and expected voices, familiar songs. Sometimes the noise dampening headphones are helpful in calming, especially for kids that are really sensitive. A voice that has an even tone, so kind of that monotone voice, right, is going to kind of calm us, especially if we're trying to get ready for bed. We're trying to go from kind of the busyness of the day to winding down for bedtime. And some kids work well with a metronome going like during homework or something like that. And that all goes to some of our preferences, right? All of these things, some people are going to like, some are not. I have worked with kiddos that really did well with that metronome. It kind of drives me nuts. So I'm going to keep myself. So we definitely have those preferences, right? Not everything is for everybody. Things that are alerting, so take us from that more couch potato to more waking up. So the loud, fast-paced music, songs with an irregular beat, so kind of like jazz is going to be your most that it's not that steady beat the whole time. There's a lot of changes and kind of unexpected changes. Something that's new, a lot of times new things get our attention, right? That's going to be a common theme through a lot of these. So a lot of kids are sensitive to those alarms and high pitch. That's something that wakes us up, right? It's meant to. That's why a fire alarm or the police siren is in that loud, high-pitched sound, because it wants to get our attention. Those are kind of alerting sounds. And then changes in volume. So speaking or songs or music or even kind of a background song that has a lot of changes in that volume, we're gonna alert to that as it changes. And then with smell, so there's some people who specialize in kind of aromatherapy. You can think along those lines, but you can use scented lotions. A lot of times now you can buy like the lavender, which is typically a calming kind of scent. Vanilla, coconut, those kinds of scents tend to be more calming. Or even just something that's familiar and really associated with something that's a really positive, pleasant kind of memory. Because we definitely attach a lot of emotions to smells. I think that's something that we hear about a little bit more now, but really any of our sensory systems, we attach a lot of emotion to those systems. And there's reasons for that, right? We're learning as we have those different experiences, and that's teaching us how to react when we have that same experience again later. So we're gonna attach some emotions to that. And then alerting stronger scents, lemon, peppermint, pine. So you can use to kind of keep a little bit more interest maybe into an activity, keep a little more alert, use scented markers. Obviously distasteful smells are going to be a little more alerting for us. And then smells that are associated with a stressful memory, we're gonna wake up. It doesn't mean that we're gonna necessarily use those to alert a child, but to be more aware, right, as we're thinking about, is there something in this environment that they have that kind of association with that's keeping them at this higher kind of stress level? They're a little more alert to their environment. And then visual tools. So calming, so colors, cool colors, your blues and greens. Something has slow moving, like a lava lamp, snow globe, those calming bottles. So sometimes putting like water and glitter into a bottle that they can kind of shake and watch it fall, or some oil in there. Dimming the lights, predictable patterns, so just really regular kind of patterns that are on either the walls or just the things they're looking at, or blank walls, not so much busy decoration. Timers can be helpful as well to be able to see it, to have a little bit more of that feedback on time, which is a very abstract concept. Alerting, so you have those bright colors, bright lights, fast-paced videos, so movement that's fast-paced, and then busy decorations. So you can even think about your child's classroom. If teachers are going to have their preferences too, right? So you might walk into one teacher's room and there are things decorated. We want to make it cute for the kids, and there's some things around. And then you walk into the next classroom and there are lots of things on the walls and lots of colors and so for some of our kids, they are going to thrive in maybe one environment or another. Another child might not be stimulated enough in that first classroom, and a different child might be overstimulated in that classroom that's more decorated, more bright colors. It's a little too much for them visually. They're working on processing all of that, and they're not getting maybe some of the other things, or having a hard time locating what it is the teacher's pointing out in the room because there's so many things visually to look at.
Oh, oral sensory tools. So these tools are maybe for kiddos who are putting a lot of things in their mouth, like Robert was talking about earlier, gum, chewing on gum, candies or chewy candies, hard candies. These are some ways that people use to stay kind of regulated. Mild or sweet flavors are more calming. Things like blowing bubbles, blowing on a pinwheel. These kind of help activate that calm, activate our nervous system to rest and digest, right? That deep breathing that we did in the beginning, kind of that same concept. Drinking things through a straw, your mouth is having to do a lot more work with that, your lips, your teeth, and your tongue, so that can be calming. Chewy, crunchy snacks and warm foods are calming as well. The more alerting oral sensory tools are things with strong flavors, so spicy, sour, mint, crunchy things, cold, and carbonated beverages. And then our tactile sensory tools. So these tools we might use are calming tools with kids who are kind of touching things. Maybe this is the kid that is touching things all over the classroom, touching things all over the house, touching all the animals and plants. Maybe they need some more calming tactile sensory input sometimes. So softer textures, firmer pressure and hugs. You can do massage, warmth, whether that's with a blanket or in the bath, cuddling, playing with water, a lot of kids like to do, and then sensory bins. But it really depends on the textures that your child likes. For some kids, maybe they really, really love playing with sand. Other kids, they might hate it and they might be really averse to it. So what goes into your sensory bin, it kind of really depends on your child. We use everything from sand, rocks, those jello beads, slime, all sorts of different textures, and it's based on individual preferences. Generally, more alerting tactile sensory tools are those rough textures, light touch, kind of more like tickles, cooler temperatures, unexpected touch, vibration can be alerting, and then again, the sensory bin goes on that side because different things might be have different responses for different kids. And then we have our vestibular tools. So this is all of our balance and movement tools. So in general, more calming is slow, rhythmic rocking. Other things you can do walking, and then sometimes we use air cushions with kids who want a little bit more movement at school on their chair. Sitting on an air cushion can give them, for some kids, just the right amount of movement that they need to stay regulated. And then more alerting vestibular movement is fast vertical movement. spinning. So these are those kids who are often going on like spinning rides. They like to swing a lot. Riding a scooter or a bike, that's vestibular input as well. Games with sudden starts and stops, and then hanging upside down. And then proprioceptive, this is our heavy work. So most proprioceptive tools, a lot of them can be calming. So when you're doing things, my favorite proprioceptive strategies are kind of things that kids can do in the house that you might be doing already. So having kids help carry a heavy grocery bag, having kids help put away cans in cabinets that they can reach, having kids push a laundry basket, anything where they get to really use their muscles and work their body is a good way to get some of that proprioceptive input.
So I think we've talked about kind of the environment and how you're using that to affect that regulation. So you can use these ideas of thinking through the environment for that moment in time, or where maybe what tools you need to use, because it's not going to necessarily be the same throughout the day, right? So the time of day. And then also you may not have necessarily, or you may want to look at the environment as to why are we having the reaction that we're having. So kind of being that detective and thinking through what's going on, and that can then help you know, okay, what do we need to change here to help this child to regulate. And then routines and structures, so especially for our kiddos that are very sensitive to their environment, the world is a very unpredictable place. So having things, routines in place that make their world a little bit more predictable, a little bit more familiar, so they know what those expectations are. Using visual schedules can be helpful, so that they know what to expect, or even just verbally going over what you're going to do that day or what the expectations are when you get there. So here's some of our resources that we like. So some resources that give you just information. Here's and then a few of the community-based programs. Many of those were here today that you got to talk with. I think that's a few books that we like and recommend.